Thank you for joining me again. One of the hardest disciplines is identifying distraction. It is going to become a massive tool to get out. Identifying distraction. You don't get to heal until you can identify all of the distractions and focus on the work. There's a lot of distractions. Things that our system has in place to cause us to lose focus. It's almost as if the world knows that focus is the core to manifestation. So it's trying to keep it away from us. Because it's figured it out. That it can't have a slave who's obedient unless you get rid of their focus with distractions. This is a lesson that I learned very well. That obedience is a death sentence. Gotta love that fourth perspective, closed-minded thinking. This is on Imagination with the Healing Garden. And this is part 2 of a video I'm going to be doing on Sundays from now on. I was left with 3 tools: my power to manifest, the universe, and my brain. And because of my love for books, I was able to immediately gravitate toward libraries. Unfortunately, libraries were not easy to find. In fact, books were banned, and unless God was mentioned in them, I was not allowed to have them. In the library I had, it was all variations of the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress. Pilgrim's Progress is classic literature. I read that book 22 times. I loved that book. I later realized that the reason why I loved it so much was because I love classic literature. And that was literally the only book I had, with the exception of the ancient texts, which I had already devoured and had been forced to memorize. The lessons I learned after that were actually about obedience. It was how I wasn't supposed to say no, how I wasn't supposed to argue. And when I was 12, that's when the first man came up to me and said he wanted something from me sexually. And I didn't even think to say no, because my father had taught me very well. My parents had also taught me another lesson at that time, which was, you're not loved unless you're needed, which is the core of codependency and narcissism. Well, not being a narcissist, but serving a narcissist. So my parents conditioned into me very, very deeply and very, very effectively that my beliefs needed to be that you are not loved unless you are needed. And the word no was banned. And you have to obey men. So when some strange man came up to me and proposed whatever, you say yes. I had been conditioned to obey. My parents never thought anything beyond the same conditioned lessons they were taught. Conditioned obedience is the dumbest thing we have ever invented. It literally destroys boundaries. You cannot have a boundary and conditional obedience. You cannot. It doesn't exist. You're screwed. You have to choose. Obedience or boundaries. It was around the time I was 8 that my father started to notice how smart I was, to the point where he informed me that I was too smart to be a girl. I then watched him shame my brother for not being as smart as me. My brother, who was a third perspective, decided to transfer and project that problem with him onto me. So he beat me for being smart. Every time I opened my mouth, I was beaten. Every time I said something that was smarter or better understood than my brother or my father, I was beaten. Every time I displayed any extent of intelligence, I was beaten, including reading, classical music, anything that reminded my brother that I was smarter than him, and he would beat me. And then when he couldn't get to me, he would torture my cats and the dogs, and he used my own empathy against me as a weapon. My mother kept watch, making sure that my brother was free to do what my brother wanted. Because my mother was an empath and a codependent, and my brother was a narcissist. And because the narcissist wanted to beat up his little sister for being smarter, my mother allowed him, because she was serving the narcissist. My sister and my brother were ignored because my mother gave all of her attention to my older brother, who was the narcissist. This is what I got to watch inside of my subconscious mind while Joanna was beaten. My father would drive home and my mother would put down her cards or her embroidery and say, "Your father's home," which was code for "Everyone get into your places." My brother would stop beating me. My sister would stop screaming in the closet. I would be left to clean up my wounds. And my father would walk in the door like a perfect pictured Sunday afternoon, a man coming home from work. And my mom beamed and said, "Hello, honey, how was your day?" And she'd kiss him. And then she would make dinner, and my father would watch TV. And every day I lived like that. I watched more animals get ripped apart and destroyed. I had to eat flesh. And then my father would sit down around the table and tell each and every one of us how horrible we were. He would start with my brother and tell him how stupid he was and how smart I was. And then he would get to me and he would tell me how selfish I was and materialistic. And then he would go on to my sister and tell her how she whined and cried all the time. And he ignored my brother because my brother was an infant, so he said nothing to him. So my brother, my oldest brother, got it. My sister is smarter. I'm not good enough for my father because my sister is smarter and she's a white girl and she should not be smarter than a white man. So the next day I would have extra beatings. And I learned that I was selfish, that I was always thinking of myself. Gotta love that narcissistic gaslighting. So I would become less selfless and less selfless. I'm sorry, reverse that. Gotta love that subconscious shit. I would become more selfless and more selfless. I would give more and more and more. That's the conditioning I received from my father. That no matter how much I gave, it was never going to be good enough. Great, great conditioning for someone seeking to serve an empath, for a narcissist. This was done in various forms to all of us. It's the little things that parents would say. It's the negativity. It's the things like, "You're never good enough." And "You're only loved when you're being needed." That is great chemistry and makeup right there for narcissism. We have to go find a narcissist. We need a slave master. So that defines us. It becomes who we are. So that when I was 14 and 15, and I had people, men, pursuing me, the concept of no never even entered my mind. Instead, I thought things like, oh my God, I hope someone wants me. Oh my God, I hope somebody would just want me for me. Oh my God, I'm wanted. You just want to be wanted. And you open your heart out and you show them too quickly because you're so eager to have somebody want you that you give them your love, your heart, your vulnerability. You tell them all of their secrets. Like, my brother beats me every day. And when he beats me, he tells me, I'm going to fucking kill you. And then I get to watch him kill animals. That's how I grew up. That is how I grew up. When I was 15, my boyfriend said to me one day, I was huge into BDSM. That's another story. That was actually my shadow self looking for a control, a siphon, so I could feel control. I didn't turn to, that's how it saved me. BDSM saved me. If I didn't have BDSM, I would have had drugs. If I didn't have BDSM, I would have had self-mutilation. No, I found how to manage control in a different way. I became a mistress. I was a mistress. At 8, I was rigging my siblings. At 12, I was begging my parents for a flogger of my own. And when they told me no, I wet my hair and used my hair. I was very proud of the welts it left on my subs. All volunteers, and they consented. They were my friends, and they also went, whoa, look at that one. So that by the time I was 15, I was literally building my own dungeon. And my boyfriend asked one day if we could switch roles, if I would be the sub and he could be the master. And I said yes. I ended up in chains that day, and they could not and did not come off for 6 months. He kept me locked in a room, and he made it clear that if I did not cooperate, he would have my brother kill me. So I had to choose between my brother killing me or being raped. I am happy to report that the entire time I was obedient. It took 2 years for the scars on my wrist to heal. I sat in the bedroom listening to him have his parties with his friends every night. And I had to be ready in position at 10 o'clock. He took orders. He would tell me exactly how he wanted the room to be, what I was to be wearing. And if I gave any lip, if I was anything other than obedient, he would have my brother kill me. I would listen to him laughing and partying with his friends in the room next to mine while I waited for the rape. And I would cry. One day, one of his friends found me. The only fucking black boy in town. Only the black boy had the decency to notice and actually give a shit about somebody crying. That's the town I grew up in. His name was Rodney. He came in and he asked me what was wrong. And I told him my feelings. I told him how I had to listen to the parties every night while I sat on the outside. I didn't tell him the other part. And he said to me so happily, why don't you come in with us? And I said I was told I wasn't allowed to. So Rodney picked me up. He took me by the hand and he pulled me into the party room. And I paid for that later. Yeah, obedience is great. In January, after 6 months of living like that, I realized that I could fight my brother and live and win. I could survive. I realized that I could handle my brother. I knew that I could survive it, or I would die trying. So I made the decision to end the rapes and go to my brother instead and go back, live with my father, and go back to being beaten. Except I had just lived 6 months wearing chains and being somebody's whore. So I was a lot stronger then. I wrote a note to him, severing all contact, and I moved out. And I moved back in with my father. The boy who did that to me was the son of my stepfather. I lived with my mother and my stepfather. And that happened under their roof without them even knowing it. That was also part of my obedience, was to not tell anyone. He made me his secret keeper. All abusers put that responsibility on the people they abuse. And I watched all of this from the fourth level of my subconscious mind. I got home, and I remember standing in the shower. I took a 2-hour shower, the hottest shower I ever had in my life. I felt like I was washing the sex and the abuse and the filth off of me. I remember studying the scars on my wrists from the handcuffs and the chains. I do not detail everything he did to me in those 6 months. If you want to know, you can buy my book Broken and read my memoir. It is the only time I detailed it, and I will not detail it again. I remember reading about the Colorado kidnapper. I remember reading the memoirs of those women. The first woman he kidnapped, the one who wrote the book Separate, she wrote her memoir, and she describes the first shower she had taken after 6 months to a year of being ragged and raped and used like that. And it felt just like that. Just completely stripping away all of what had been done to you. The shame is unbearable. You could feel your skin filth, and you just wanted to cut your own skin off of your body because it just repulsed you that much. You felt like you were naked in the middle of the room, being exposed for everyone to laugh at. That's what it felt like. That is the feeling I had when I was 15, 16, 17. Oh, it's been years since I felt it now. I said goodbye to that feeling a long time ago. I think it was year 2 of my therapy. I finally got rid of that feeling. My brother and I got into a fight shortly thereafter. We fought. I watched him threaten to beat animals again, and I decided to put myself between him and the animals, but he would not touch me again. A few months prior to me moving in with that boyfriend, there was a fight between my brother and I. This one was the worst fight. He went after my sister. He had already been beating me since I was 8. I had gone to school with black eyes. I had learned to wear my hair like this to cover the bruises. He and I were fighting that year. And he punched my head into the wall 8 times, and then he kicked me. And then I didn't feel it. I felt nothing. And I was so relieved that there was no pain suddenly that I just looked up at him and smiled. I had switched. That was Kalon. He found my fake wing. Joanna couldn't handle that. Not that day. He pushed Joanna to the limits that day. And on that day, when I was 15 years old and he was beating the hell out of me to the point where I had that much pain, I switched and the pain was gone. I became Kalon. I smiled at him, and scared, he fell back because I smiled at him, and he went for my sister. He started strangling her. You don't touch my sister. So I grabbed a pair of scissors that were on the table. I stood up and I stabbed him. The cop showed up about half an hour later, yelling at me for stabbing him. He had spent every day of my life telling me he was going to fucking kill me. I watched him rip apart animals. He beat me every fucking day because I was smarter than him. He finally beat me to the point where the pain was so severe that I split. And then he went for my sister. And the police yelled at me. My parents yelled at me. And my sister said nothing. She just sat there holding her throat, sobbing, in front of the cop and my parents, who didn't even notice that she was holding her throat and sobbing. Oblivious. That was the last time my brother ever beat me. About a month or 2 later, I would be moving in with the boyfriend who would end up raping me for 6 months. So when I moved back in with my brother, I knew I could take it. I was living in the delusion that I could not protect myself for 6 months. I had already protected myself. Colin had, not Joanna. So Joanna still thought she couldn't protect herself, which is why she stayed for 6 months with a rapist until she realized, oh, I can protect myself. So Joanna returned home, and she spent the rest of the 4 years putting herself between her brother and the animals he tried to mutilate. She became a rescue mission to protect the animals. I had my father carve a cat door into my bedroom wall so that I could keep my door closed, locked my door, keep it barricaded. My brother would pick the lock, so I'd had to put the dresser in front of the door all the time. And the cat could come in and out safely. Eventually, I would get the cat boxes, move them into my room, and completely quarantine us inside the room at all times. This is what it looks like inside. It was around this time that I was reading Sherlock Holmes, and I realized I wanted to be smart like Sherlock. So I said it. I said, I want to be as smart as that. Within a few weeks, I was studying philosophy. I was studying psychology. I noticed something. I had this massive epiphany at age 15, where I just realized, oh my God, all of my abusers are uneducated. You know, I bet you if I educate myself, I can become smarter than them. I figured that if I could just outsmart them, I could escape. At that point, I had been raped for 6 months. I had been beaten. I still had no idea that I was crammed in the fourth subconscious mind. There were two things that had happened after I was 8, immediately after I was 8. The first thing is I developed an unusual pain all over my body and especially in my stomach every time I sat down to eat. I could not eat without experiencing severe pain. That started when I was 8 years old. It ended last year. Food hurt. The other thing that happened was a nightmare, the same nightmare every night for 32 years. The nightmare was of me standing in a room with a bunch of cloaked men, all wearing hoods. And they all looked at me eye to eye. And I could talk to them as their equals. And then boom, they were big. They were scary. They were screaming at me, bearing down on me, and then they would shrink again. And I would be eye to eye looking at them as their equals. And then they'd be big again, screaming down, towering over me. I would fall to the floor. There was never any doors. I was trapped in this stainless steel room with moonlight pouring out of the top. This is a dream I had every day of my life for 32 years. From the time I was 8 and that incident happened to a year ago. May of 2022 is when I figured all this out. I remembered that core memory. I realized I was an altar. And I know why I had pains every time I ate. It's because I was a vegetarian and my identity was trying to remember, was trying to remind me who I was. It was the part of identity that was trapped inside of me that was sending me messages saying, this isn't who you are. Don't do it. That is how deep the subconscious mind goes. That even when they took identity, the part of me, my ego, when you have split personality, it's your identity and your ego both. They crammed me down. And all I had to go on was my identity saying, don't eat meat. So it sent me severe body and stomach pains. And then that nightmare, as if it was trying to get me to remember. Identity is where nightmares and memories come from. Or not memories, but memories, yeah. Memories and dreams come from our identity. So whenever you have a reoccurring dream, that's your identity trying to talk to you. If you have PTSD, it's your identity trying to help you understand the perspective. But identity speaks in abstract. Identity speaks a different language than everybody else. So most people cannot understand identity. So identity was literally sending me these pains to say, stop eating the meat. Stop eating the meat. You're a vegetarian. This is against your ethic. And I ate and ate. I would do subconscious things. Identity would have me do things to steer away from the meat. Tricks that I learned, like fill up on milk. Make sure you eat fruit and vegetables before dinner. Make yourself not hungry. Anything to avoid having to put food in my mouth that was an animal. And then at night, she would send me the same dream of these men in cloaks towering over me, screaming. And then I can see eye to eye in their same perspective, and then they're over me again, screaming at me. It was the day where I looked and saw all of these adult men as my equal. And I gave my voice And then they jumped up over me and they all came down screaming at me. I needed to remember that memory. But I couldn't. So that memory was put inside of my subconscious mind. My identity sent it to me every night. I finally healed enough in April last year that my alters were finally able to write a letter to Joanna and say, you have multiple personality disorder and you don't know we're here. After that, it opened a floodgate. I suddenly realized, holy shit, my alters. I had already studied 26 years of psychology, philosophy. And now I had 4 beautiful psychologists inside of my head, all with the ability of seeing one situation from 4 different perspectives. And I'm smart. And I was able to manifest from the time I was 4 and 6 years old. And the universe was on my side. So I started to, on purpose, study multiple personality disorder, what it was like inside of my head, documenting it all. And then I figured out what causes us to switch. It was the emotions. Emotions caused each one of us to switch. That led me into the study of emotions, what they're for, what they do, where they come from. And I was doing all of this while inside the subconscious mind. From April of 2022 to today, September 3rd of 2023, my subconscious mind, my alters, and I consciously toured the subconscious mind, ripped it apart, located everything inside of it, and analyzed it, trying to figure out which caused each alter to do what, learning how to switch perspectives, taking material that I had been studying since I was 5 years old, 15 years old, using the power of manifestation that I'd had since I was 4. When I was 15 years old, and I realized that I was smarter than my captors, that if I just get smarter, get more educated, that I'll have the upper hand, that this was just a battle between who was stupider. And I realized that all of my abusers were uneducated. I realized that educated people don't abuse. Educated people don't abuse. Educated people don't abuse. Now, why is that, you think? These were the questions I wanted to know. And I had a severe, deep curiosity and a love for books. So I started studying philosophy, sociology, theology, psychology. I studied mathematics, music theory, geometry. I started playing the piano when I was 4. So by the time I was 15 studying music theory, I was all over that shit. When I was 12, I was full-blown into music composition. I told you, I was smart. My brother was beating me for it. Frequency was my favorite. There was a lot of similarities I saw between the universe and the frequency. When I studied music, it was like I was looking at the universe. In fact, when you are high on acid and you can see music, no, my dears, you're looking at the energy field. It's all frequency. You're not seeing music. You're not seeing light. You're not seeing color. You're not seeing sound. You are seeing the frequencies. It's all frequency. You're looking at the energy field. Acid loves to play with the hippocampus. Psychedelics are all about the hippocampus. I manifested my own education journey without realizing it. I just knew that whatever I wished for, I got. So I wished for being as smart as Sherlock Holmes. I wished for logic. I wished for knowledge. I wished for education. I wanted to know who this God person was. I wanted to know what the universe was. I wanted to know how to cure mental illness. I wanted to know how to get us to world peace. I wanted to know how to fix the world. I wanted to stop abusers from hurting. I didn't want to avenge my abuser. I wanted to take away their victims. So I wished for all of those things when I was 15. And then I studied books. I read encyclopedias. I studied more books. I found libraries. I snuck books. I hid books. 3 days after I escaped and got away from that rapist, I met an online pedophile. He was a 45-year-old attorney living in New York City, and he had a thing for 12 to 15-year-old girls. I did not know it then. I know it now. He had studied psychology. He had studied psychology. And when you study psychology, you learn how to trust people. You learn how to manipulate people. You learn how to control people. Most people who study psychology use this information for good. He did not. Now, knowing where I am, oh, I know what he did. He used grooming, gaslighting, strategically, on purpose. On purpose. It was 100% deliberate. There are textbooks, handbooks, teaching pedophiles and teaching predators how to use psychology. This is horrible. How to use psychology to target victims of any and all ages. There are some really bad psychologists out there. And I got to see just how bad this goes. I got involved with trafficking rings. I discovered the dark web, where they pass their information back and forth and they teach each other how You can buy lessons on the black web. The only one who doesn't know about this are good people. The bad people all know about this. The good people are clueless. The good people are the predators. I'm sorry, are the prey. The good people are the ones that they are feasting on. So you have no idea this is out there. I got to see it. I got to experience it. I know how they work. I got to see the 5th level of the subconscious mind, and I don't talk about it because I got to see how fucking horrible people really are. How horrible parents are to their children on purpose. The people who live in the 5th level of the subconscious mind like it there. They're Daleks. Either you get it or you don't. They're Daleks. That's what's on the 5th level of the subconscious mind. They think hate is beautiful. I don't want to look at the 5th level of the subconscious mind. Stockholm Syndrome, psychological entrapment, psychological enslavement, conditioning, systematic cognitive behavioral therapy that he used on me. He weaponized every emotion against me. And because he was an attorney, this was a man who became an attorney so he could master the art of logic, so he could accumulate victims. This was a man who mastered the art of logic, formal argument, and debate, and psychology, all so he could pray. I'm really having a hard time with this topic. All so he could prey on his victims. That's all he did. I was financially abused. I was emotionally abused. I was verbally and physically abused. I was controlled in every way you could possibly imagine for 5 years. I was publicly raped, scolded, shamed, rewarded. Oh, I was very obedient. He raped me on 9/11 while the towers were falling. That's where I was. It's September 3rd. This is the very first year I have had no September 11th triggers. It's so good. Every August, they start. I went through all of August. September 1st, I looked at the calendar and I went, oh my God, it's September 1st, and I did not have any triggers. And here it is, 2 days into September. I can feel the weather change and the triggers are gone. It is the first September I have experienced that's been normal for me since 1992. In 1993, no, since 1989. In 1990, my family had a car accident that killed 3 of my cousins and my uncle. 1 week after my aunt gave birth to their son. She was in the hospital nursing a 1-week-old child while she buried her husband and 3 children. My best friend was in that car accident, and my mother said, you can save her because she's your best friend and she loved you so much. We hope that she'll remember you. So I was forced for a year at the bedside of my brain-dead cousin and my best friend. All hope dumped on me that she would talk again. She's fine. She did talk again. She had to relearn everything. It took her a year to speak again. She had to learn how to rewalk, retalk. It literally reset her brain to ground zero. And her leg was broken to the point where she never grew again. And I was, at 10 years old, put in the middle of that and made responsible for her recovery. The universe and I spent a lot of time together that year. The universe became my escape. My imagination became my salvation. Since 1990, I was not able to smell fall and be in September without trauma and triggers. The accident took place on September 13th, 1990. So when 9/11 happened on September 11, it was just one more horrific September. And this is the first year I'm getting to enjoy September, just September again, as if it were 1989. My God. He raped me on 9/11, and I listened to the towers fall. And something shifted in my head. I had been raped every night in my sleep. I cannot sleep next to anybody except one man because of that. Or maybe I can. Maybe I need to manifest that and reverse it. And I was raped in public all over the place. Publicly being raped is a different kind of humility. I was raped in parking lots. I was raped in movie theaters. I was raped everywhere, all over New Jersey, which is why I hate New Jersey. And something shifted in me on 9/11. I realized that the bad guys can win. And I created something called the Rorschach Print Perspective. I tried to break up with him. I tried to leave him. I tried to escape. But the psychological entrapment had me convinced. He had me convinced because of toxic beliefs. He used toxic beliefs to keep me obedient. The toxic belief he used was, you can't have New York City without me. You're not going to be anything without me. God, he was such a narcissist. The toxic belief he used was, you can't break up with me. You can't break up with me. Because. After 9/11, I had this massive epiphany that went like this. I see all of us, every one of us sitting on top of a pillar, looking out side by side at this one truth. And it's just us on our pillar looking at truth. But what if we are really looking at that truth through a filter, like a Rorschach print? What if there is a Rorschach print filter in front of each and every one of us, and not one, but multiple and many, all distorting reality, all distorting truth, forcing us to see what someone else wants us to see? Religion is one Rorschach print. Tradition is another Rorschach print. Conformity, your father, your mother, your brother who beat you, are all just one more Rorschach print. And what if what is real is on the other side of all of those Rorschach prints? And reality is really about knowing that you're looking through the Rorschach prints and removing them one by one. So we look above it, we look around it, because we want to see the truth, but we can't. We're being forced to look at reality through a Rorschach print. How many Rorschach prints are you looking through? How many prints have been forced into your pathway? How much distortion is in the way of your reality? And that stopped my Stockholm Syndrome on the spot. And I looked at him and said, it's an opinion. Everything you say is an opinion. There is no truth. Everything you think is just your perspective. Everything you think is just your perspective. It is just the information you were able to accumulate through your 5 senses. But we don't all see the same color. Our eyes are not the same. Our taste buds are not the same. Our noses are not the same. Our cognitive cores are not the same. Nothing is the same. That's the delusion. Nothing is the same. So we will never be able to see eye to eye. I can try and use my words to show you what I see, but you cannot be in my head. Some people who are not good at communication try to explain their perspective, and they can't. And we have forgotten this. We assume that all of us understand each other, and we assume that all of us are on the same page. We assume that everybody has one perspective, the true perspective, and it's up to each one of us to make sure we are all aligned to the one perspective. But the perspective is a lie. It's a matrix put there, forced on us to see what someone else wants us to see. It is another Rorschach print. The reality is, a perspective is an opinion, and there is no fact. There is no truth. There is no one right perspective. That is the lie. There are 8 billion perspectives on this earth. There are currently 8 billion perspectives on this earth. Every person goes through the stages of growth. This is psychology. The stages of growth have 9 to date. Stages. Most of us stifle around the 4th stage. Some of us make it to the 5th stage, and some of you make it to the 6th stage. So, in addition to every person having their own perspective, you can have up to 9 different stages of your one perspective. You are literally 1 in 8 billion. And there will be possibly, potentially, 9 versions of you, maybe more. That is how rare you are. This is the work I started 3 months after 9/11. This is what 9/11 gave me. My triadic healing was birthed out of the 9/11 catastrophe. It is a direct consequence of 9/11. I'm going to put this in words for you. Every person is worth 8 billion people. That day, we lost 3,000. And if every person is worth 8 billion people, what we really lost was the equivalent of 8 billion people times 3,000. That is the price of triadic healing. That is the cost that we had to pay to get triadic healing. The Rorschach print perspective is exactly what I invented that day. It is the power to understand the validity, the grandeur, the importance of perspective, and the skill, perspective shifting. It's a skill. And I would spend the next 20 years of my life mastering it. I was 21 years old. I had already studied philosophy and psychology for 6 years. I was still suppressed. At that point, I had 2 alters inside of me Colin and Joanna. My identity started to scream. And I was still working with the universe, using my brain and manifesting the questions that I sought. Who is God? How do you cure mental illness? What is wrong with the world today? I asked every fucking big question you could think of. And I manifested for the answers. And then I took my beautiful brain and I educated myself and I learned. And I got really good at paying attention to the universe and listening to her and doing as she said when she said it. If you want to get involved and get started, if you want to learn more about Tradic healing, click on the link below and fill it out. If you want to get into the garden and learn about everything that I do here, and I do a lot, click on the link below, fill it out, and I will be in touch with you shortly. I'm going to take a 15-minute break, and then I will come back and tell you the next part of my life. Thank you, and may the kindest of words always find you.